Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever walked through a room, performing a task with practiced perfection, only to realize that to everyone else, you are nothing more than a ghost? A function. A uniform. A pair of hands that clears a plate or fills a glass, but never a person with a name, a story, or a dream. We build walls around ourselves, adorned with the labels of status and success, and from behind them, we judge. We categorize. We dismiss. But what happens when one of those invisible people has a light so bright it can no longer be contained? What happens when a single, careless word becomes the spark that ignites a revolution of the human spirit? This is a story about what it means to be seen. It began on a cold Tuesday night, under the 1,000 crystal chandeliers of Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a place to eat and more like a museum of wealth. At a corner table, insulated by plush velvet and the hushed reverence of the staff, sat Julian and Isabel Croft. To the outside world, they were a portrait of power. Julian, a self-made millionaire with a mind that moved like lightning and a face etched with the permanent tension of 1,000 high-stakes decisions. Isabel, his wife, was a sculpture of polished perfection, her beauty as sharp and flawless as the diamond on her finger. She surveyed the room not with appreciation, but with the weary air of a queen assessing her tedious domain. Between them stood Alara. In her crisp black uniform, she was the epitome of professional invisibility. She moved with a quiet, efficient grace, her steps silent on the marble floor. But behind her calm expression, behind the polite tilt of her head, a storm of exhaustion was brewing. Every table she cleared, every order she took, was one small step toward the mountain of bills on her small kitchen table, a monument to her mother's failing health. She placed Isabel's main course, the pan-seared scallops with saffron risotto, on the table. It was Chef Antoine's signature dish, a point of pride for the restaurant. Isabel stared at it, her lip curling in a subtle sneer. She picked up her fork, prodded a single scallop, and let it drop. "This is simply unacceptable," she announced, her voice a cold, clear bell that cut through the restaurant's murmur. Alara's posture stiffened. "Is there something wrong with the dish, madam?" she asked, her voice steady. "Wrong?" Isabel laughed, a brittle, unpleasant sound. "It's pedestrian. The risotto is gluey, and the scallops taste of nothing. It tastes like something a line cook made on his first day." Julian was on his phone, his voice a low, urgent growl as he closed the deal across 3 time zones. He was present in body, but his mind was miles away, navigating the treacherous currents of the stock market. Alara maintained her composure. "I am very sorry to hear that. Would you like me to bring you something else?" "The sea base is excellent this evening." Isabel waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her wrist scattering the light. "No. I've lost my appetite. Just take this away. Honestly, what is the point of paying these prices for food that has no soul?" She looked directly at Alara, her eyes cold and appraising, as if Alara herself were responsible for the dish's failings. "You can't expect quality from people who have none themselves." Alara's training screamed at her to smile, to apologize, to de-escalate. But the weariness of 1,000 shifts, of endless worry, made her hesitate for a fraction of a second too long. In that sliver of silence, Isabel's disdain curdled into outright cruelty. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss, loud enough for only Alara and, as fate would have it, her husband to hear. "Just take it away. It's probably for the best. After all, what would trash like you know about fine dining anyway?" At that exact moment, Julian spoke the final words of his deal. "It's done. Wire the funds," and lowered the phone from his ear. The word hung in the air between the 3 of them, ugly and toxic. Trash. He saw Alara flinch, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through her body. He saw her eyes, wide and wounded, for just a second before a mask of professional neutrality slammed back into place. He looked at his wife, at her smug, satisfied expression, and felt a chasm open up beneath his feet. The glittering chandeliers, the expensive wine, the hushed reverence of the room, it all suddenly felt obscene. He had just made millions of dollars, but in that one sickening moment he had never felt poorer. The single word, trash, echoed in the space Julian's phone call had just vacated. It was a physical thing, a shard of glass thrown carelessly, and he had watched it embed itself in the quiet dignity of the young woman before him. He saw the way her shoulders tightened, the way her gaze dropped to the floor, not in shame, but as if searching for a place to hide from the sheer ugliness of the insult. She gathered her composure with a strength that astonished him, her hands steady as she reached for the plate. "My apologies, madam," she said, her voice a low, controlled whisper. "I will have it removed from your bill." She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, a solitary soldier retreating from a battle she was never meant to fight. Julian turned his gaze to Isabel. "What did you say to her?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Isabel, still flushed with her petty victory, shrugged. "I simply told the truth. The service is slow, the food is a disaster, and she has the personality of a wet rag. Honestly, Julian, you get what you pay for, and tonight, we are paying far too much for this." But Julian wasn't listening to her justifications. His eyes were following Ilara's retreating form. He watched her push through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and for the first time that night, he felt a desperate urge to see what was on the other side. Behind those doors was another world. The serene calm of the dining room was replaced by a cacophony of clanging pans, hissing grills, and the sharp, barked orders of Chef Antoine. The air was thick with heat, steam, and the palpable stress of a dozen cooks moving in a frantic, choreographed dance. Ilara placed the rejected plate on the stainless steel counter. Chef Antoine, a man whose ego was as inflated as his toque, glanced at it. "Table 7? He grunted. "She said the risotto was gluey," Ilara reported softly. Antoine snatched the plate. He took a fork, tasted a small amount, and chewed thoughtfully before swallowing. "The risotto is perfect," he declared to the kitchen at large. "The seasoning is precise. The texture is sublime. The woman at table 7 is a Philistine with a palate like a goat." He scraped the expensive dish into the bin with a flourish of contempt. "Get back to your tables. We are not a soup kitchen for entitled wives." Ilara nodded, her face betraying no emotion, and turned to leave. The injustice of it all, the customer's cruelty, the chef's arrogance, was a familiar weight. Later, during her 15-minute break, she huddled in a small, concrete alcove behind the restaurant. The cold night air was a relief after the kitchen's inferno. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled out a small, dog-eared notebook and a pen. Its pages were filled with a delicate, precise script and intricate sketches of plated food. It was her sanctuary, the one place her dreams were safe. She turned to a fresh page and, under the dim glow of a security light, she began to write. "Scallops, pan-seared." Her pen flew across the page. "Problem: risotto too heavy. Saffron overpowers the delicate scallop. Solution: replace risotto with a lighter base. Parsnip puree, whipped with brown butter and a hint of nutmeg. Add sweetness, earthiness. Garnish with crispy sage leaves for texture and micro cilantro for freshness. A single drop of lemon oil to cut the richness." It was an instinct, a deep, intuitive understanding of flavor that Chef Antoine, with all his classical training, had long since lost. Back in the dining room, Julian had settled the bill. As they waited for their car, he discreetly pulled the manager aside. "The waitress who was serving us," he began. "Table 7. What's her name?" The manager, a man named Marcus who was perpetually flustered, blinked in surprise. "That would be Ilara, sir." "Is there a problem?" "I can assure you, no problem." Julian cut him off. "She was professional. Tell me about her." Marcus relaxed slightly. "Ilara? She's one of our best. Hard worker. Never late, never complains. Works a lot of doubles. Quiet girl, keeps to herself." Julian nodded slowly, a thought beginning to crystallize in his mind. He looked back at his wife, who was impatiently tapping her foot, and then at the swinging doors to the kitchen. He had built an empire on seeing value where others saw none, on recognizing the hidden potential in overlooked assets. And he was beginning to suspect that the most valuable thing in this entire restaurant wasn't the vintage wine in the cellar or the prime real estate it sat on, but the quiet, dignified waitress his wife had just dismissed as trash. The days that followed were unsettling for Julian. Isabel's cruel word, trash, had become a burr under his skin, an insistent irritant he couldn't ignore. It had highlighted a rot in his own life, a casual dehumanization that he now saw everywhere. He started to notice the valet who took his keys every morning, not just as a uniform, but as a young man with tired eyes who was probably a student. He saw the cleaning lady in his office building late at night, a middle-aged woman with a photo of her grandchildren taped to her cart, and he felt a pang of shame for the countless times he had walked past her without a word. He had spent his life accumulating things, companies, properties, stocks, but had failed to accumulate a basic sense of connection to the people who made his world run. His wife's callousness was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease, and he feared he was infected too. His curiosity about Alara grew into a quiet obsession. It wasn't romantic. It was something deeper, a feeling that she held a key to some truth he had lost sight of. He decided to return to Aria, not as a customer, but as an investigator. He went during the late afternoon lull, when the lunch rush had subsided and the dinner prep was just beginning. He found Marcus, the manager, overseeing the polishing of silverware. Julian, dispensing with pleasantries, got straight to the point. "Marcus, I want to know more about Alara. And I want the truth. I'm a significant investor in the parent company. Your honesty will be appreciated." The mention of his investor status worked like a charm. Marcus's professional veneer cracked, revealing a genuinely weary man. "Mr. Croft, Alara is a good kid. A really good kid. She's had it tough." He proceeded to tell Julian everything. Alara was the sole caregiver for her mother, a former nurse who had been forced into early retirement by a debilitating illness. The medical bills were astronomical. Alara worked a full-time schedule at Aria and picked up weekend shifts at a diner across town. She lived in a tiny apartment, and every spare dollar went to medication and physical therapy. "She never asks for help," Marcus said, shaking his head. "She just puts her head down and works. But I see the toll it takes. Some days she looks like she's about to collapse." Then, Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. "And you know, the girl's got a gift. She's always scribbling in this little notebook. Recipes, ideas for dishes. She sees things. Ways to improve the menu. She once suggested a tiny change to the sauce for the duck breast that, I swear, made it 10 times better. Does Chef Antoine know?" Julian asked. Marcus snorted. "Antoine? He'd have a fit. He thinks she's just a waitress. He told her once that a server's job is to carry plates, not have opinions. Said her meddling was an insult to his art. She hasn't brought it up since." That was it. That was the piece Julian had been searching for. It wasn't just about a hard-working girl being insulted. It was about a hidden talent being actively suppressed. It was about a gatekeeper, blinded by arrogance, standing in the way of true innovation. That evening, Julian drove through a part of the city he hadn't visited in years. He found Alara's apartment building, a modest, clean but worn-down brick structure. He didn't get out of the car. He just sat and watched the warm, yellow light in a third-floor window. Through the thin curtains, he could see the silhouette of 2 people. One, Alara, was gently spooning something into the other's mouth. The other figure, frail and seated, was her mother. Even from his car, Julian could feel the palpable tenderness in the room. It was a world away from the cold, performative luxury of Aria. Her apartment was small, her furniture was second-hand, her life was a struggle. But that little room, illuminated by a single lamp, contained more warmth and soul than his sprawling, empty mansion. He saw her notebook open on the table beside them. It wasn't just a hobby. It was her weapon. It was her hope. And Julian Croft, a man who built his fortune by betting on underdogs, decided it was time to place the biggest bet of his life. Julian Croft did not become a millionaire by accepting the status quo. He had built his empire by challenging it, by kicking down doors that others said were locked. Now, he intended to do the same at Aria. He scheduled an emergency meeting with the restaurant's management board, which included Marcus, a few stoic investors, and the formidable chef Antoine. He also insisted that Isabelle attend, a decision she found both baffling and irritating. They gathered in Aria's private dining room, the air thick with tension and expensive cologne. Julian let them settle before he spoke. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I've called this meeting because I believe Aria is facing a crisis. Not a financial one, but a crisis of identity. We have become complacent, predictable. We have lost our soul." Chef Antoine bristled, his face reddening. "My kitchen has 3 Michelin stars, Monsieur Croft. We are the pinnacle of fine dining in this city. Our soul is on every plate, is it?" Julian countered, his gaze sharp. "Or is it the same soul it was 5 years ago? The same soul it was 10 years ago? A restaurant, like any business, must evolve or it will die." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Which is why I am proposing something new. An initiative. I'm calling it the Aria Innovation Night." He outlined the plan. For one night only, the menu's featured special would not be a creation of Chef Antoine, but a dish conceived, developed, and prepared by a member of the staff. Any member. A line cook, a busboy, a dishwasher, a waitress. A wave of stunned silence washed over the room. It was Chef Antoine who broke it, a harsh, barking laugh erupting from his chest. "You are joking," he said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "This is a joke, no? You want me to put a cleaner's casserole on my menu? A busboy's burger next to my foie gras torchon? This is an insult to me, to my team, to the very concept of haute cuisine." His voice rose with indignation, his French accent becoming thicker with every word. "You would turn my temple of gastronomy into a school cafeteria talent show." Isabelle, who had been silently fuming at being dragged into a business meeting, finally spoke up, her voice dripping with condescension. "Darling, this is utterly absurd," she said, placing a hand on Julian's arm. He subtly moved it away. "I understand you were upset about our little incident the other night, but this is a ridiculous overreaction. You can't possibly be serious. You're letting that little waitress get into your head. She's a nobody. Her job is to carry things." Her words, meant to be the voice of reason, were like gasoline on a fire. They crystallized everything Julian was fighting against: the prejudice, the snobbery, the blind adherence to a hierarchy that valued position over potential. He looked from Antoine's sputtering rage to his wife's smug certainty. They were two sides of the same coin, gatekeepers of a world that refused to look down, for fear of seeing the talent they were standing on. Julian's voice dropped, losing its corporate polish and gaining a hard, steely edge. "I have never been more serious in my life," he said, his eyes locking onto Antoine's. "My controlling interest in this restaurant group gives me the authority to insist. The competition will happen. A panel, consisting of myself, Marcus, and you, chef, will judge the submissions. The winner's dish will be served 1 week from tonight. That is not a suggestion. It is a decision." He then turned his cold gaze to Isabelle. "And you, my dear, will be there to taste it." The room was silent once more, but this time, it was the silence of shock. Julian had thrown down a gauntlet. He wasn't just challenging a menu, he was challenging an entire worldview. He was waging a quiet war against the casual cruelty he had witnessed, and he had just chosen his champion. The announcement of the Aria Innovation Night landed among the staff with a thud. Marcus posted the notice in the break room, a professionally printed flyer that felt deeply out of place next to handwritten shift-swapping requests and faded safety posters. The reaction was a mix of cynical laughter and weary indifference. To the overworked line cooks and harried bussers, it was just another bizarre corporate stunt, a fleeting whim of the rich investors who floated in a world far removed from their own. They saw it as a joke, a hollow gesture that would ultimately change nothing. But for Alara, the flyer was like a sudden, blinding flash of light in the long, dark tunnel of her life. She read the words, all staff. Dish. Judged by a panel. Featured on the menu, and a fragile, unfamiliar feeling fluttered in her chest. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling, one she had learned to suppress. Hope led to disappointment. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought of her notebook, her secret world of flavors and ideas. Then she thought of Chef Antoine's withering scorn, of Isabel Croft's venomous whisper. Trash. The word was a brand on her soul. Who was she to think she could create something worthy of Aria's menu? The spark of hope flickered and died, smothered by a lifetime of being told she was invisible. A few days later, Julien returned to the restaurant. He came in the quiet hours of the afternoon, finding Elara at a back station, meticulously polishing silverware, her movements rhythmic and automatic. She was so lost in the repetitive task, in the safety of her invisibility, that she didn't notice him approach until he was standing right beside her. "Elara," he said softly. She jumped, a spoon clattering onto the floor. "Mr. Croft," she stammered, her face flushing as she bent to retrieve it. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see you, it's fine," he said, his voice gentle. He didn't mention the incident with his wife. He knew that would only embarrass her. Instead, he took a different approach. "I was speaking with Marcus the other day," he began, leaning against the counter. "He told me something interesting. He told me about a notebook." Elara froze, her hand tightening around a fork. She clutched her apron, a subconscious gesture to protect the pocket where she always kept it. I don't know what you mean," she said, her eyes fixed on the silverware. "I think you do." Julien pressed, his tone kind but insistent. "He told me you have ideas. Good ones? Ideas about how to make the food here even better." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the flicker of pride warring with the deep-seated fear of being seen, of being judged. "I saw the notice for the competition," he continued. "I imagine you did too." She remained silent, her knuckles white as she gripped the polishing cloth. Julien sighed softly. He needed her to understand. "Elara, look at me." Hesitantly, she lifted her head, her gaze meeting his. "That night," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "my wife was wrong. What she said was cruel and unacceptable, and it had nothing to do with you and everything to do with her own unhappiness. But I am afraid she represents a certain way of thinking. A way of thinking that puts people in boxes. You're a waitress, Antoine is a chef, I'm a millionaire, and those boxes are meant to keep us in our place." He took a step closer. "This competition. This is not a gimmick. This is a chance to prove that those boxes mean nothing. Talent doesn't care what uniform you wear. Passion doesn't look at your job title. Don't let someone else's opinion of your position define the limits of your potential." He was speaking directly to the wound Isabel had inflicted. He was offering her not pity, but respect. He was seeing her, not the uniform, not the function, but the person. A tear escaped from the corner of her eye and traced a silent path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because," Julien said, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I believe people who have hearts should be heard. And I have a feeling you have a great deal to say." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "I hope you'll consider entering, Elara. Aria needs a new voice." As he walked away, Elara stood motionless, the silver fork still in her hand. But for the first time, when she looked at her reflection in its polished surface, she didn't just see a tired waitress. She saw a flicker of the person Julien Croft saw. She saw a chef. Julien's words became the foundation upon which Elara rebuilt her courage. That night, after settling her mother into bed, she sat at her small kitchen table, the notebook open before her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by a flicker of defiance. She would not let Isabel Croft's cruelty be the final word on her life. She would not let Chef Antoine's arrogance keep her talent locked away. She would enter the competition. But what would she make? She flipped through the pages of her notebook, past elegant but soulless imitations of French cuisine, past trendy dishes she thought a panel might want to see. None of them felt right. They weren't her. Then she came to a page near the back, a recipe scribbled hastily, born not from ambition but from memory. It was a variation of a simple stew her own mother used to make for her when she was a child, a dish of comfort and love from a time before illness and struggle had clouded their lives. It was humble, but it was honest. She would elevate it. She would use the techniques she had absorbed from years of watching the chefs at Aria, infusing the simple, rustic dish with a level of sophistication and complexity they would never expect. She called it Hearthfire Stew, a name that evoked warmth, resilience, and home. The next few days were a blur. She worked her shifts at Aria, her mind a whirlwind of ingredient pairings and cooking times. At night, she transformed her tiny kitchen into a culinary laboratory. She spent her meager savings on high-quality ingredients, testing and retesting, tweaking the seasoning, adjusting the balance of flavors until it was perfect. In the Aria kitchen, her newfound purpose made her a target. Chef Antoine, who saw the competition as a personal affront, watched her with narrowed eyes. He saw the quiet confidence that had replaced her usual timidity, and it infuriated him. "Playing chef, are we, little bird?" he would sneer as she passed by. "Trying to fly before you have learned to walk? Be careful you do not fall and break your neck." The other cooks, taking their cue from him, kept their distance, treating her with a mixture of pity and scorn. She was an outcast, a waitress who had forgotten her place. The day of the tasting arrived. The three judges, Julien, Marcus, and a deeply reluctant Chef Antoine, would taste the submissions from the few staff members who had dared to enter. Elara had carefully packed her components, ready to assemble her dish. But as she reached for the small, refrigerated container of rare chervil root, the key ingredient that provided a subtle, anise-like sweetness to her stew, she found it was gone. Panic seized her. She frantically searched the staff refrigerator, her heart pounding. It was nowhere. Across the kitchen, she saw Chef Antoine observing her, a tiny, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had taken it. He hadn't forbidden her from competing, but he would ensure she failed. Her time slot was in 10 minutes. It was a deliberate, cruel act of sabotage. As her panic threatened to overwhelm her, she saw Antoine directing one of the junior cooks to use the specific convection oven she had carefully preheated, forcing her to use an older, less reliable model. It was a coordinated attack on her chances. For a moment, she felt the familiar sting of despair. He was right. She was just a waitress. She should have stayed in her place. But then, Julien's words echoed in her mind, "Talent doesn't care what uniform you wear." A fire ignited within her. Anger replaced fear. She would not be broken. She scanned the pantry, her mind racing. Chervil root was gone. What else had that subtle sweetness, that earthy note? Her eyes landed on a basket of parsnips. It wasn't a perfect substitute, but it could work. She would have to adjust everything, roast them first to concentrate their sugar, puree them to a finer consistency, add a different herb to balance the flavor. It was a risk, a complete improvisation under immense pressure. It was the ultimate test of her skill. She was no longer just following a recipe. She was creating. Wiping sweat from her brow, she grabbed the parsnips and a knife. Her hands, once trembling with fear, were now steady and sure. The little bird was not going to fall. She was going to fly. Elara worked with a desperate, focused intensity that blocked out the rest of the world. The scornful eyes of the other cooks, the ticking clock, the simmering rage at Antoine's sabotage, it all faded away, replaced by the rhythm of her knife on the cutting board, the sizzle of vegetables in a hot pan, and the deep, intuitive knowledge of her craft. She plated her Hearthfire Stew, just as Marcus called her name. It wasn't as visually perfect as she had planned. The improvised parsnip puree was a slightly different shade, the garnish hastily applied. But as she carried the bowl into the private dining room, the aroma that preceded her was extraordinary, a rich, complex scent of roasted root vegetables, savory herbs, and slow-braised meat that spoke of deep, soulful cooking. She placed the dish on the table before the three judges. Her hands trembled slightly. Chef Antoine picked up his spoon, the smirk still lingering on his face. He was a predator ready to dissect his prey, to expose every flaw born from her panicked improvisation. He took a small, deliberate bite. The room was silent. Julien and Marcus watched him, waiting for the inevitable, scathing critique. But it didn't come. Antoine's expression faltered. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then grudging respect, and finally, pure, unadulterated shock. He took another, larger bite, as if to confirm what he had just tasted. The flavors were not just good, they were astonishing. The sweetness of the roasted parsnip, a brilliant substitute, perfectly balanced the richness of the braised beef. A hint of smoked paprika, another last-minute addition, provided a warmth that lingered on the palate. It was rustic yet refined, complex yet comforting. He tried to find fault. The parsnip is an unorthodox choice, he mumbled, the criticism sounding weak even to his own ears. It lacks the delicacy of the chervil root. But he knew, and they knew he knew, that it was a masterful improvisation. Marcus, emboldened, took a taste. His eyes widened. My word, Elara, he breathed. This is incredible. It feels familiar, but new at the same time. Finally, it was Julien's turn. He had watched the entire exchange, his face unreadable. He picked up his spoon and took a bite. The camera of the imagined short film would hold on his face, capturing the wave of emotion that washed over him. It was more than just delicious food. It tasted of resilience. It tasted of struggle overcome. It tasted of a mother's love and a daughter's hope. It was a story in a bowl. He felt a lump form in his throat. This was the soul he had accused the restaurant of lacking. This was the heart. He slowly placed his spoon down on the table, the soft clink echoing in the silent room. He looked up, past the expensive dish, and met Elara's nervous, hopeful gaze. Chef Antoine, Julien said, his voice clear and resonant. You are a master of technique. Your food is a testament to precision and discipline. It is, by every definition, perfect. He then turned his full attention to Elara. But this, he said, gesturing to her humble bowl of stew, this is not just perfect. This is alive. This is not just a dish. It is a masterpiece. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked from Marcus to a stunned and speechless Antoine. The winner is Elara, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Her dish will be the featured special for the Aria Innovation Night. No arguments. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of validation. Through the blur, she saw Julien smile at her, a genuine, proud smile. In that moment, she was no longer the invisible waitress. She was no longer the girl who had been called trash. She was an artist who had finally been seen. Chef Antoine simply stared at the bowl, his world, with its rigid rules and unshakable hierarchies, tilting precariously on its axis. He had tried to crush her, and instead, he had forced her to create something even more brilliant. He had been defeated not by technique, but by heart. The week leading up to the Aria Innovation Night was a whirlwind of change. By Julien's decree, Elara was temporarily relieved of her waitressing duties and given a station in the kitchen to prep for her big night. The shift in dynamics was seismic. The kitchen staff, who had previously scorned her, now watched her with a grudging respect. They had all witnessed Antoine's failed sabotage and her subsequent triumph. They saw the way she measured her ingredients with a chef's precision and the quiet authority with which she directed the two junior cooks assigned to help her. Chef Antoine remained a thunderous presence, observing her from a distance, his pride warring with the undeniable evidence of her talent. He offered no help, but he also presented no further obstacles. He was a king watching a usurper prepare for a coronation in his own court. Julien had insisted Isabelle be there. You will be at my table, front and center, he had told her, his tone leaving no room for argument. She arrived cloaked in an armor of defiant cynicism, expecting the entire evening to be a catastrophic failure, a final, embarrassing chapter in her husband's bizarre philanthropic whim. She sat at the best table in the house, the one she had sat at when she had insulted Alara, a piece of deliberate staging on Julian's part. She watched the restaurant fill up, a smug smile on her face, ready for the schadenfreude. The menu for the night had a special insert. On thick, creamy cardstock, it read, "Tonight's featured special. Alara's Hethfire Stew, a dish of slow-braised beef and winter root vegetables, inspired by resilience, comfort, and hope." The name itself was an affront to Isabel's sensibilities. It was so sentimental. At first, the orders came in slowly. Diners, accustomed to Antoine's elaborate creations, were hesitant. But then the first few bowls left the kitchen. The incredible aroma began to permeate the dining room, turning heads, sparking curiosity. A murmur spread from table to table. A diner 2 tables away from Isabel took his first bite, and visibly sagged in his chair with pleasure, calling the sommelier over to ask for the perfect wine pairing. Soon, the trickle of orders became a flood. The printers in the kitchen chattered nonstop with requests for Alara's special. From her seat, Isabel could see the controlled chaos of the dining room and, through the open pass, a glimpse of Alara herself. She wasn't the timid, downtrodden waitress anymore. She stood at her station, her face flushed from the heat, her eyes bright with focus, calmly inspecting every single bowl before it went out, a dusting of fresh parsley here, a drizzle of herb oil there. She was a conductor commanding an orchestra. The sight was deeply unsettling to Isabel. It challenged the very foundation of her worldview, where people fit into neat, unchangeable categories. Waitresses did not become star chefs overnight. Finally, unable to bear the suspense and the glowing reviews she was overhearing from every direction, Isabel summoned the waiter. "I'll have the special," she said, the words feeling foreign and bitter in her mouth. When the dish arrived, it looked deceptively simple. It was a stew. A peasant's dish. But the smell was intoxicating. She picked up her spoon, her movements stiff. She took a small, hesitant bite. The effect was instantaneous and undeniable. The flavor exploded on her tongue, rich, deep, and impossibly complex. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It wasn't just food, it was a feeling. It tasted of warmth on a cold night, of a loving home, of a resilience she couldn't begin to comprehend. Her perfectly constructed mask of cynical detachment shattered. Tears pricked at her eyes. She looked up and saw her husband watching her from across the table. There was no triumph in his expression, no "I told you so." There was only a profound, knowing sadness. Then, her gaze was drawn across the restaurant to the kitchen pass. She saw Alara, pausing for a moment to wipe her brow, a weary but radiant smile on her face. She was no longer a function, no longer a uniform, no longer trash. She was the beating heart of this entire evening, the celebrated artist in a room full of admirers. And Isabel, in her couture dress and her flawless diamonds, had never felt so small, so hollow, so utterly and completely wrong. The humiliation was a cold, bitter taste that no amount of expensive wine could wash away. The night ended in a roar of applause. When the last dessert had been served, Julian stood and tapped his glass for attention. He spoke briefly about the restaurant's need for new ideas and then, to the shock of the diners and the delight of the staff, he introduced Alara. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her chef's whites smudged with sauce. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and absolutely glowing. The entire restaurant rose to its feet in a standing ovation. The sound washed over her, a wave of acceptance and validation so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. Later, after the last of the patrons had departed, Julian found Isabel standing outside in the cool night air. She was wrapped in her cashmere coat, a solitary figure shrouded in the glow of the streetlights. She looked smaller, more fragile than he had ever seen her. "It was good," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. The words seemed to cost her a great deal. Julian came to stand beside her, not touching her, the space between them a tangible thing. "It was more than good, Isabel," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. "It was a person's story on a plate. It was everything she has endured, everything she has hoped for. It was her soul." He turned to face her. "And you called her trash. You looked at a woman with that much heart, that much talent, and that much resilience, and that is the word you chose. What does that say about us? About the world we've built for ourselves, where we can't see the value of a person standing right in front of us?" Isabel had no answer. For the first time in their marriage, her sharp wit, her practiced defenses, were gone. She just stared at the pavement, the reflection of the glittering restaurant sign mocking her. The foundation of their relationship, built on shared status and mutual ambition, had been fractured by a simple bowl of stew. The damage felt irreparable. Inside, the staff was cleaning up, but the atmosphere was electric, celebratory. Julian found Alara in the now quiet kitchen, carefully cleaning her station. "You should be proud of yourself," he said, his voice warm. She looked up, a shy, tired smile on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. For everything. For believing in me. This was all you, Alara. I just opened the door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." He paused, his expression turning serious. "And this isn't the end. It's the beginning. I told you once that I invest in people. And I have never seen a better investment than you." Alara looked confused. "A promotion? Chef Antoine would never." Julian held up a hand. "I'm not talking about a promotion. I'm talking about a partnership. I want to fund you. I want to help you open your own restaurant. A place that is built around your food, your vision. A place with heart." The words hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her hand pressed to her chest as if to keep her heart from bursting. Her own restaurant. It was a dream so distant, so impossible, she had never even dared to speak it aloud. I don't know what to say," she stammered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "There's more," Julian continued gently. "My family's foundation will be taking care of all of your mother's medical expenses. All of them. Effective immediately. Your only job from now on is to focus on your gift." That was the moment the last of her burdens finally fell away. The crushing weight of the bills, the constant worry, the sleepless nights, it all dissolved in a wave of overwhelming relief and gratitude. She looked at this man, this stranger who had seen her when no one else had, and understood that he hadn't just changed her career. He had saved her life. She was no longer just surviving. For the first time, she could finally, truly, begin to live. 1 year later. The camera pans across a bustling, vibrant restaurant. The sign above the door, written in a warm, elegant script, reads, "Alara's." The interior is not opulent like Aria, but it is beautiful, filled with warm wood, soft lighting, and the happy chatter of contented diners. It feels less like a restaurant and more like a home. Alara, now the head chef and owner, moves through her open kitchen with a confidence that is breathtaking to behold. She is no longer the timid, invisible waitress. She is a leader, an artist in her element, tasting a sauce here, offering a word of encouragement there, her face illuminated by a genuine, unburdened smile. Her staff, many of whom followed her from Aria, work with a joyful efficiency, a stark contrast to the tense, fear-driven atmosphere of Chef Antoine's kitchen. At a quiet corner table, a woman sits, her health much improved, her eyes sparkling with pride as she watches her daughter. It is Alara's mother, enjoying a meal in her daughter's restaurant, a testament to the promise Julian had made. Even Chef Antoine makes an appearance. One afternoon, he walks in, looking humbled and years older. He orders the hearthfire stew. After he finishes, he walks to the kitchen pass and meets Alara's eyes. "The dish," he says, his voice thick with a grudging respect he can no longer deny. "It was and is brilliant." It is a small moment, a quiet peace offering, and Alara accepts it with a gracious nod. His validation no longer matters, but his apology does. Julian is a regular customer. He sits at the bar, nursing a drink, looking 10 years younger. The permanent tension in his face has eased. He's no longer just a businessman, he's a mentor, a friend. He found a purpose beyond the bottom line, the profound satisfaction of changing a life. His relationship with Isabel ended. The chasm that opened between them that night at Aria was too wide to bridge. He had realized he wanted a life of meaning, not just status, and she could not follow him there. In the final scene, Elara stands at the pass, looking out over the full dining room. She catches her reflection in the glass of a framed review on the wall, a glowing, 5-star review praising her soulful, innovative cooking. She looks at her own reflection, really looks, and sees herself clearly for the first time, not as a waitress, not as a caregiver, not as a victim, but as a creator. A chef. A survivor. A woman who found her voice. The narrator's voice returns, warm and direct. So, I ask you again. Have you ever felt invisible? Remember, Elara. Remember that a person's worth is not defined by their job, their uniform, or the callous judgment of others. It is defined by the contents of their heart, the fire of their talent, and the resilience of their spirit. True value is so often hidden in plain sight, in the quiet people who make the world turn, waiting for just one person to look closer. To see past the surface and recognize the masterpiece within. Look closer. See the people around you. The person pouring your coffee, the one cleaning your office, the one answering the phone. Because the next hidden gem, the next revolutionary idea, the next heart that can change the world, might be standing right there in front of you, just waiting for a chance to shine. All it takes is for one person to see. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Remind them that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be seen.